Imagine telling a government that the absolute best way to get out of a massive, crippling debt crisis is to borrow billions of dollars, pay half the population to dig giant holes in the ground, and then,
And then pay the other half to fill those exact same holes back up.
right, pay them to fill the holes back up. It sounds completely insane, right?
Yeah.
Like printing money just to fund pointless manual labor.
It does. But, that exact counterintuitive logic, the idea that action, literally any action, is better than a paralyzed market, it literally built the modern world.
It's wild to think about because, before this, the prevailing wisdom just treated economics like physics.
Exactly, like a law of nature. You drop an apple, gravity pulls it down, the market crashes, you just wait patiently, and the invisible hand will naturally pull everything back to equilibrium.
But then you step into the world of actual human behavior, of, panic and fear, and suddenly that perfect mathematical precision just shatters. We're looking at an economic landscape that is incredibly messy.
Very messy.
And that messiness is exactly what we are exploring today. So, welcome to a brand new deep dive. We have a massive, really fascinating stack of sources detailing the life, the theories, and the deep contradictions of the architect of the modern economy, John Maynard Keynes.
It's a huge topic.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive is to basically decode the guy who designed the world you live in. Whether you are buying groceries or, watching the Federal Reserve change interest rates or wondering why the government sends out stimulus checks during a global crisis, you are living in a world built on his ideas.
And what's truly captivating about the source material here is that Keynes wasn't some dry, isolated academic just, staring at chalkboards all day.
No, none of that.
He was a philosopher, he was a passionate art lover, a millionaire investor, and an unapologetic eccentric. He fundamentally believed that economics should serve humanity, not the other way around.
Yeah, we have to start by looking at who this guy actually was as a person, because his incredibly elite upbringing directly informed his willingness to just rewrite the fundamental laws of money.
Right.
He was born in Cambridge in 1883 into what you could only really call an intellectually aristocratic family. Like, his father was a renowned economist and logician.
And his mother was one of the first female graduates of Cambridge and the city's first female mayor.
Oh, wow. Okay, so quite the family dynamic.
Exactly. He grew up in a household where debating complex ethics and formal logic was just, it was standard dinner table conversation. He was disciplined, exceptionally brilliant, and highly competitive.
A tough environment to slack off in.
For sure. But he wasn't a rebel without a cause. He was someone who mastered the rules so thoroughly that he felt uniquely qualified to break them.
And he proved it early on. He goes to Eton College at 14, wins basically every prize in math and history. Then he's back at Cambridge at King's College, where he joins this elite secret society called the Apostles.
Which is where things get really interesting.
Yeah. He becomes a central figure in the Bloomsbury Group. And this is a crucial detail in the sources. The Bloomsbury Group was this circle of artists and writers, including people like Virginia Woolf, who actively defied rigid Victorian moral standards.
They were very bohemian for the time.
Very. And Keynes himself was openly bisexual in an era where that was entirely taboo and, frankly, legally dangerous. So he was an iconoclast in his personal life, and that same energy just bled directly into his professional life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see a young man who is supremely confident, perhaps undeniably arrogant, and completely unafraid to question established norms.
Right.
And he brings that exact disruptive energy to his first real job at the India office in London.
Which he was kind of bored by, right? He's sitting there dealing with bureaucracy, but he notices something huge.
Yeah.
At the time, the entire world is obsessed with the gold standard.
The absolute rule.
Yeah, the absolute rule that money had to be backed by physical gold locked in a vault somewhere. But India was using something called a gold exchange standard. They didn't hold physical gold for every rupee in circulation.
They just held foreign currency reserves that were convertible to gold, which proved a radical point to him. The system wasn't a law of nature.
Right.
A government could manage its currency reserves to stabilize its internal economy without needing a giant pile of shiny metal. Money wasn't a sacred, immovable object. It was a completely artificial mechanism.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the classical economists of the era treated money like a physical law, like, gravity or thermodynamics.
Exactly.
But young Keynes looks at how India operates and realizes money is actually more like a rubber band. Like, it's a tool that a central government can stretch, manipulate, and manage.
That realization that economic systems are malleable and completely subject to human design, that set the stage for literally everything he did next. And it deeply horrified him when he saw world leaders manipulating those exact systems, not for stability, but for pure vengeance.
Right, because he realizes you can't blindly trust the old rules. But it took a geopolitical catastrophe to show him how dangerous it is when leaders actively weaponize the economy.
World War I.
Exactly. He's managing the UK's finances during World War I, which leads us to the 1919 Versailles Peace Conference. He's there representing the British Treasury, and he watches the Allies draft this treaty, imposing absolutely unpayable, crushing economic reparations on a defeated Germany.
He runs the numbers and realizes the math simply does not work. Germany would be bled dry.
So what does he do?
He resigns in protest. And he writes a blistering, incredibly famous book called The Economic Consequences of the Peace.
Yeah.
In it, he predicts with terrifying accuracy that humiliating Germany and intentionally destroying its economy wouldn't bring lasting peace. It would lead directly to radicalization and another catastrophic world war.
He walks away from the most important negotiating table in the history of the world because the politicians wouldn't listen to his math.
Yep.
So was this just his famous Eton arrogance flaring up, or was he genuinely the only adult in the room who understood human nature?
This raises an important question about his character. It was really an explosive mixture of both. He certainly had the arrogance to believe he was the smartest man in the room.
I mean, he usually was.
Fair, but he also had the profound empathy and foresight to visualize the actual human suffering those numbers would cause a decade down the line. He knew you cannot build a stable global society on a foundation of forced economic despair.
And his ability to foresee the devastating real-world consequences of awful economic policy in 1919 perfectly sets the stage for the next massive crisis. Because 10 years later, the world realizes that you also can't just sit back and wait for a broken economy to fix itself.
The 1929 stock market crash.
Exactly, which triggers the Great Depression.
The Great Depression was the ultimate, undeniable failure of classical economics. The orthodox view at the time, driven by concepts like Say's law, was that the market would always fix itself if you just left it alone.
Say's law, right.
Say's law essentially argued that the mere act of producing goods creates enough income for workers to buy those goods. Therefore, a massive, lingering depression was theoretically impossible.
It's crazy to think they believed that. The classic economists are sitting there in the 1930s saying, just be patient. Let wages fall naturally, and businesses will eventually hire people back.
Meanwhile, the real world was falling apart.
Exactly. The sources paint this brutal reality. 1 in 4 Americans are completely unemployed. People are starving in shanty towns. The market is definitely not fixing itself.
Because classical economics assumed that wages and prices were perfectly flexible.
Right.
That they would just glide down smoothly until companies could afford to hire again.
But that's not how people work.
No. Keynes observed the real world. He saw that wages are what he called sticky. Labor unions will fight to the bitter end against wage cuts, and business owners would rather fire half their staff than drastically drop the prices of their products.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Keynes realizes that if a massive factory cuts everyone's wages so they can afford to hire more people, suddenly no one in town makes enough money to actually buy what the factory's producing. It's like everyone at a crowded concert decided to stand up to get a better view. Individually, for one person, it makes perfect sense. But collectively, when everyone does it, nobody can see anything, and the whole system breaks down.
That concert analogy perfectly describes the vicious macroeconomic cycle he identified. And out of this profound frustration with the old guard, he publishes his masterwork in 1936.
The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money.
Right. And with this single text, he essentially invents the modern field of macroeconomics. He shifts the entire focus. The economy isn't driven by how much factories can produce. It's driven entirely by aggregate demand.
Aggregate demand. So the sources basically say the economy is just a giant pie made of 4 slices, right? What everyday consumers spend, what businesses invest, what the government buys, and the net of what we trade with the rest of the world.
You've got it. And during a severe depression, the consumer slice of that pie shrinks rapidly because people are terrified of losing their jobs, so they hoard every penny.
Makes sense.
Then the business investment slice shrinks because companies look at terrified consumers and decide not to build new factories. This creates a massive, gaping hole in aggregate demand.
Because we aren't robots.
Exactly. Keynes argued that human beings aren't rational calculating machines. We are driven by what he famously called animal spirits, unpredictable waves of irrational optimism and paralyzing fear.
Okay, so if the consumers are too terrified to spend, and the businesses are too terrified to hire who's left in the room to actually spend any money to get the machine moving again.
And that is exactly the hole Keynes saw. The only entity left that doesn't have to worry about losing its job, the only actor large enough to fill that void, is the government.
So the government steps in. And he explains how this actually fixes the problem, using something called the Keynesian multiplier. This concept blew my mind.
It's brilliant.
The idea is, if the government spends $1 million building a bridge, it doesn't just create $1 million worth of economic activity. The construction workers get paid, and they have a propensity to consume.
Right.
They take their paychecks
Right.
and spend, say, 80% of it at the local butcher.
And then the butcher takes that sudden influx of cash and spends 80% of it at the tailor, who spends it at the mechanic.
It just keeps going.
It ripples through the economy, creating jobs and demand in sectors that have absolutely nothing to do with building bridges. This is the concept of priming the pump. You have to pour a little water into a dry well to create the suction needed to get the water flowing naturally again.
But wait, typically when the economy slows down, we rely on the central bank, right? They
Right.
just lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper so businesses will take out loans and expand. Why couldn't they just do that in the 1930s?
Because of a terrifying scenario, Keynes identified called the liquidity trap.
The liquidity trap.
Think of it like pushing on a string. A central bank can drop interest rates all the way to 0%. They can make money incredibly cheap to borrow. But if those animal spirits are gripped by pure panic, people will just hoard cash under their mattresses.
So it doesn't matter how cheap the money is.
Exactly. A business owner won't take out a 0% loan to build a factory if they're convinced no one will buy their products. When you hit a liquidity trap, people won't spend, and traditional monetary policy becomes completely useless.
Which means the only lever left to pull is direct fiscal spending. The government has to bypass the paralyzed banking system entirely, go straight into the economy, and put money directly into the hands of people who will spend it.
Precisely.
Wait, but if the government is just printing billions of dollars to build bridges, or literally paying people to bury money in bottles and dig it up again, which the sources note he actually joked about, isn't that a one-way ticket to massive, destructive inflation?
It's a common fear.
I mean, people listening to this are already dealing with high grocery bills. A government just printing endless money sounds like a terrible idea.
This is perhaps the most heavily misunderstood aspect of his entire philosophy. Keynes explicitly warned against the dangers of inflation.
They did.
Yes. His prescription for aggressive government deficit spending came with a massive caveat. It was only meant for times when the economy had high unemployment and spare capacity. Meaning, when factories are sitting empty and millions of people want to work but can't.
Oh, I see.
He argued fiercely that once the pump was primed, once the economy recovered and reached full employment, the government absolutely must pull back, reduce its spending, and raise taxes to pay off the debt it accumulated. Pumping money into an economy that is already booming is exactly what causes inflation.
That is a massive nuance that gets conveniently ignored by politicians who just want to spend money all the time.
It often is.
So he proposes these radical theories in the 1930s, but they are put to the ultimate global test during World War II, and this period completely shifts his role. He goes from being a radical outsider throwing stones at the establishment to literally becoming the architect of the post-war global financial order.
And he took on this monumental task while his own body was actively failing him. By the late 1930s, Keynes was suffering from severe infectious endocarditis, a brutal infection of the heart valves.
That sounds awful.
In a pre-antibiotic era, it was essentially a slow death sentence. He was kept alive and functioning largely through the fierce devotion of his wife, Lydia Lipokova. She was a famous Russian ballerina who carefully managed his schedule and fiercely shielded him from exhaustion.
But his mind is still racing, right? In 1939, as the war begins, he writes a piece called How to Pay for the War. Instead of just printing money and causing wartime inflation or raising taxes so high that it crushes public morale, he proposes something called deferred savings.
A very clever idea.
Yeah. The government retained a portion of workers' paychecks during the war, taking that money out of circulation to prevent inflation, and then promises to pay it back with interest after the war ends, precisely to prevent a post-war depression when the munitions factory shut down.
It was brilliant foresight, but his crowning achievement, and really his final exhausting battle, came in 1944. A pale, dying Keynes travels to the Mount Washington Hotel in the United States for the Bretton Woods Conference.
This is a huge moment.
You have 730 delegates from 44 nations gathering to design the financial architecture for the entire post-war world, all while bombs are literally still falling in Europe.
And Keynes comes to the table with a radical proposal to maintain global peace.
Mhm.
He doesn't want any single national currency to dominate the world. He proposes a neutral global currency called the Bancor.
The Bancor, yes.
And it had this brilliant built-in balancing mechanism where extreme trade deficits and extreme trade surpluses would be penalized, forcing all nations to trade cooperatively rather than hoarding wealth.
But he was up against Harry Dexter White, representing the United States. And the U.S. flatly rejected the Bancor.
Because they wanted the power.
The mechanics of global power were at play here. The U.S. held the vast majority of the world's gold reserves at the time and emerged from the war as the dominant industrial power. They wanted the U.S. dollar to be the global reserve currency because it grants what is known as an exorbitant privilege.
Exorbitant privilege. What does that mean exactly?
If the whole world needs dollars to trade, the U.S. can essentially dictate economic terms and fund its own deficits much easier than any other nation. Because Britain was essentially bankrupt from fighting the war, Keynes just didn't have the leverage to stop the Americans.
So he loses the battle for the Bancor because Britain was broke and the U.S. held all the cards.
What?
But out of that conference came the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. Looking at the immense power of those institutions today, did he ultimately win the war of ideas?
He laid the foundation for the global architecture we still rely on today. Even without his global currency, the very idea of international institutions designed to stabilize global markets, monitor trade, and provide emergency lending to prevent localized depressions from spreading globally. That is purely a Keynesian vision.
That makes sense.
His effort at Bretton Woods was monumental. Despite suffering a minor heart attack during the grueling negotiations, he delivered a closing speech so powerful that the entire assembly of world leaders gave him a standing ovation.
He gave literally everything he had to the cause. But, to truly understand the scope of this deep dive, we have to look at the shadows, too. He wasn't a perfect, flawless hero.
No, nobody is.
The immense power his theories handed to the state came with deep contradictions. And the sources highlight several things we need to impartially report on to get the full picture of the man.
One of the darkest shadows documented in the historical record is that from 1937 to 1944, Keynes served as the president of the British Eugenics Society. It was a viewpoint shared by a shocking number of the British elite at the time. The horrific idea that the state should actively intervene to control the reproduction of lower classes to improve the race.
It's incredibly dark.
It stands as a jarring, brutal contradiction for a man who otherwise dedicated his life to championing human welfare and ending poverty. We're simply conveying what the historical record shows, but it is a stark reminder of the deeply flawed and often dangerous ideologies present in that era's elite academic circles.
It's a profound contradiction. And there are other complexities to his character as well. Like he's this legendary figure advising massive governments on careful, prudent fiscal management. But in his personal life, he was essentially a gambler.
Oh, absolutely.
He invested from his bed every morning before breakfast. He lost absolute fortunes in the volatile commodity markets, made them all back, and ended up dying with a personal fortune equivalent to about $30 million today.
And he also managed King's College's endowment and averaged an astonishing 12% annual return for decades.
That's better than most hedge funds.
Oh, definitely. But his staunch belief in heavy state intervention also sparked the defining economic debate of the 20th century. His intense rivalry with the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek.
Keynes versus Hayek.
Exactly. Keynes argued that state intervention was an absolute necessity to save capitalism from its own destructive, cyclical nature. Hayek argued the exact opposite.
Right.
Hayek believed that giving a central government that much power to plan and intervene in the economy inevitably leads down what he called the road to serfdom. Hayek's fear was that central economic planning eventually requires central social planning, ultimately destroying individual liberty and leading to totalitarianism.
And it's important to note, we aren't taking a side in that political debate today. We are just laying out the intellectual battlefield that really defined the Cold War era.
Absolutely.
But even their rivalry was complex. When Hayek published The Road to Serfdom, Keynes actually wrote him a personal letter calling it a deep and necessary book, even while fundamentally disagreeing with his core economic conclusions.
He was a man of infinite, fascinating complexities. I mean, this is the same man who bought a secret, hidden box of Isaac Newton's papers at auction, studied them, and discovered that the father of modern rational physics was actually deeply obsessed with the occult practice of alchemy.
Alchemy.
Yeah. Keynes famously called Newton the last of the magicians.
That is wild. He was also bizarrely obsessed with people's hands. The sources say that at the Versailles Peace Conference, instead of just listening to the negotiations, he would sit there and psychologically analyze the world leaders just by scrutinizing the shape of their hands, trying to predict their political moves.
He was a very unique observer.
Oh, and he somehow found the time to found the Arts Council of Great Britain. So what does this all mean? He's not some boring textbook formula to be memorized. He's an art-loving, market-gambling, alchemy-reading eccentric. He feels more like a brilliant, tragically flawed protagonist in a prestige TV drama than a traditional academic economist.
Which brings us to perhaps the most widely misunderstood thing he ever said, when classical critics argued that if you just leave the economy alone, in the long run, the free market will naturally return to equilibrium and fix the crippling unemployment.
Keynes famously replied, "In the long run, we are all dead."
Yes.
People always use that quote to say he was cynical. They claim it proves he only cared about short-term political fixes and completely ignored the long-term debt and consequences of his policies.
But the source material clarifies this beautifully. He wasn't being cynical in the slightest. He was expressing deep, urgent compassion.
How so?
He was essentially saying, if you are drowning in the middle of a hurricane and the economist on the boat tells you that once the storm passes the ocean will naturally be calm again, well, that economist is completely useless to you.
Because you're drowning now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was demanding urgent action for the millions of people suffering right now. He wanted to save capitalism from its own worst, most volatile tendencies so that society wouldn't collapse into political extremism while waiting around for the market to magically heal itself.
Which connects right back to you listening to this deep dive right now. Every single time you see a government pass a massive stimulus bill to keep businesses afloat during a crisis like 2008 or the COVID-19 pandemic, or every time they cut taxes to fight off a looming recession, you are watching Keynesianism in action.
You really
We are living inside the machinery he designed.
We truly are. And there is a final thought I'd like to leave you to ponder. Keynes firmly believed that the ultimate goal of a functioning economy wasn't just to relentlessly accumulate capital or hit arbitrary GDP growth targets year after year.
Right.
The whole point of managing the economy, in his eyes, was to eventually solve the problem of basic human survival, thereby freeing up humanity to pursue what actually matters, enjoying art, music, leisure, and beauty.
Look around at our modern economy today. We use all of his mathematical tools. We rely on his multiplier effect. We constantly track aggregate demand. We empower central banks to manage liquidity traps. But looking at how we actually live our lives today, with a constant, never-ending grind and hustle, have we completely forgotten his ultimate goal?
It brings us right back to the beautifully chaotic system we were talking about at the very beginning. We managed to predict how the apple falls, but we seemingly forgot why we were studying gravity in the first place.
We absolutely forgot. The math might be cleaner now, and the tools might be sharper, but the human element at the center of the economy is still just as messy as ever.
No te vayas del video antes de comentar, suscribirte o darle like. Recuerda que estamos en TikTok, Instagram y YouTube.